And welcome to the latest episode where we're joined today by Tetratherix, fresh off the back of their critical announcement with Superpower Health. We're joined by founder Ali Fatty and the CEO Will Knox, where we discuss that particular announcement, as well as their platform thinking, their capital discipline, and the art of building optionality from a company of just less than 30 people based in Sydney. In just 9 months since listing, Tetratherix has ticked off milestone after milestone, and as I discussed today, I think is the deal that changes the entire financial narrative, the Superpower partnership. We hope you enjoy.
Gents, feels a little bit different holding a microphone like this. I feel like I'm a game show host, but thanks very much for joining us again. I think it's sort of 9 months since the first episode that we had you on, 9 months since listing.
Wow.
Obviously got Ali and Will. Ali, founder, Will, CEO. It's been a bit of a journey, but maybe if we just, before we get stuck into the story, take us back for those that may be less familiar with the story and haven't listened to the first episode. What were you trying to solve at Uni of Sydney way back when? When did you
2010 actually.
2010, so 15 years. And what made you think that you could actually build a business around this?
The whole thing was just to be able to have materials that we can help body to repair and regenerate itself. So that was the topic of the PhD, and how to do it was with polymer programming, having a material that we can inject. It can form cohesive chewing gum consistency. It stays where it's injected to, and essentially over time breaks down, allow body to do what it's good at, which is essentially repair and regenerate itself. So that was the genesis of the PhD. So I invented this new polymer, this new chemical entity, and essentially from there we established the different utility of a technology for dental, for different long bone regeneration application, prostate spacing, eye surgery, and most recent development, which is essentially what we'll talk about, hopefully, more today for drug delivery applications. So that was it, basically.
Perfect. I always like the analogies around chewing gum and also medical Lego that you've spoken about before. But you've got 5 products, 3 franchises. Sorry, 4
franchises.
We'll get to that later. But and one underlying sort of chemistry platform.
That's correct.
Why structure it that way, and why not just give it your best shot in one play and go all in?
A very good point. So from the inceptions, the strategy was to use it as a platform to address different unmet needs. We are good in innovation. We are good in developing new technologies, and we are good in essentially manufacture this technology for different application as a finished good, as a final good. So these are the two sides of a business that we are focusing on. And what we are not intending to do is to have an in-market presence with marketing and sales and distributions. Based on that, we focus on this platform application of the technology rather than single product, single asset.
And that's why it gives us a very unique commercial opportunity as well. And that's not sort of accidental. That's all deliberate by design, where we can actually put together a structured financial model within the business that allows for rapid growth of compounding high gross margin revenue. And again, we're trying to pitch the business and the technology in a different way to try and meet the new demands of the healthcare system. And one of the things that we often talk about that was part of the thinking around the design of the technology is making sure that we can deliver something through a fine gauge needle, so it's minimally invasive. The patient expectations on recovery and hospital stays are becoming shorter and shorter. But then importantly, from an economic and healthcare sort of structural perspective, particularly in the US, there's more and more of these procedures being done in more of like an outpatient or ambulatory surgery setting, sort of clinical environment. And so that means things have to be cheaper, easier, simple as far as the clinical workflow goes. And so we're trying to address those sort of more healthcare and so health economic demands in the market as well. And so all of that combined is a technology and a platform that's trying to differentiate itself globally, looking at where healthcare is going rather than where healthcare has been.
Perfect. Well answered. Maybe a question for you again, Will, in terms of founder of Xero, being Roger, is a substantial shareholder and a long-term investor. He's termed or said that Tetratherix is applying a SaaS sort of platform-like thinking to medical devices. Mm-hmm. What do you think he actually means by that?
Yeah, it's an interesting concept to get your head around, and some investors click onto it really quickly and some take a bit more explanation. But typically what he's getting to there is that platform nature of the material and the technology means that we can have these very distinct field of use agreements with multiple partnerships. And so the important part to differentiate us around some of the other sort of traditional ways of developing these technologies is often the design development costs ramp up, if not probably accelerate over a period of time as the products get into market and as you want to try and further develop. Over the last 10 or 15 years, the money that we've put into the R&D of the business and the technology is almost at that point where it's going to be pretty flat for the next foreseeable future. And so I think what Rod's getting to there is that software style structure of commerciality around a fixed cost base, but then high gross margin compounding SaaS style revenue on top of it is really where we're getting to. So there's more of an analogy around the business structure, but then also the result of having that structure commercially.
So you were the last listing on the ASX in FY25.
Yep.
The first in about 7 months in terms of from a biotech, medtech. It was a little bit of a graveyard there for a bit. Obviously, a couple have come through since, and it's been tough. What made you have the choice of listing on the ASX? Was it out of necessity? Was it out of conviction that now is definitely the right time? How did you sort of look at that?
Yeah, we tried to externalize the macro from what we were trying to achieve. And I think the sort of conviction that we had commercially and technically for the business was such that we knew where we were going. We knew how we wanted to fund it. But then importantly, as we transition from what was and still to a degree is today an R&D entity into a commercial business, there were commercial demands on the company that we had to meet. Predominantly, the big one of those is production and manufacturing. So we knew we needed a new facility. We had confidence in the partnerships that we were forming, but then importantly, the launches on reg approvals, which I'm sure we'll get onto today, meant that we had a really defined path ahead. We knew where we were going and we had to fund it. And so we were lucky that we had good service providers and advisors around us on how to do it and how to do it properly. And we often joke that, people say, oh, the IPO window was, ajar or maybe open. It was slammed shut, but we jumped through anyway. And so that was that conviction that we talked about.
And the stock did really well post-listing, and I think it almost doubled at one stage. Still done really well now. How do you sort of manage that? It's probably come off, 20 or 30% from the highs, which if you have a look at Promedicus and WiseTech and a bunch of others have come off 60, 70, a lot more. Is it hard to not be emotional in terms of the share price when you're running multi-year scientific programs, or how do you sort of look at that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think in the first probably 3, 4 or 5 weeks after listing, I reckon my phone would die by about 10 a.m. because you just keep refreshing every time to try and see how the share price was going. But then after a while, you realise that the share price is what it is.
Nothing changes.
Well, exactly, and we often bring up the explanation or the analogy that Rod actually had at our IPO listing day, where he very accurately said the share price on any given time frame is the most desperate buyer and the most desperate seller, and that is the price that sets the share price in the market. You can't do anything about it, and it's not reflective of where you've gone and where the journey is going to take you. And so we just need to keep focusing on delivering, and the share price is going to look after itself.
So it is Will's job technically to sort of look at the share price, but there have been occasions for me, like been weeks that I didn't check the share price. And again, referencing Rod on this was one of the first things that he said. Just go through the IPO, put the share price in a drawer, and just deliver. And that's what we do.
You've been doing it for 15 years in terms of being at the business. It doesn't change in 9 months, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's right.
I think the main reason why we're here today is obviously the significant announcement of Superpower, which I've finally mastered in terms of getting the name right. Talk to us about, maybe just a quick snapshot for those that mightn't have seen the announcement. You've been a master of 3 key takeaways and whatnot. Sorry to put you on the spot, but maybe start off with there.
Yeah, look, it's really exciting for us, and I think it's something that I'll let Ali touch on, sort of the backing from a technical and R&D perspective that's been working in the background. But for us, I think my 3 key takeaways. One is the fact that we're bringing revenue forward. So I think for us, it's a really exciting commercial inflection.
It's not insignificant revenue as well. Maybe just cover off on that as well.
Yeah, so it's there's two different components to the agreement. There's an exclusivity or a license style payment. And again, we talked about this through the prospectus and afterwards around how we structure these agreements. And this is a really good example where there is an exclusivity style payment that we get per year, which is $3 million US, which basically is, as we call it, a hunting license, which gives you the license to go after, a particular indication or use of the product. And so that will allow us to work exclusively with Superpower in the US market to explore the use of our material for delivering drugs, peptides, therapeutics, in particular GLP-1s, which I'm sure we'll get onto, for nasal delivery, which is a no needle access, which is a huge thing in a fast growing market. And again, I'm sure we'll touch on that. That's a really big key takeaway. I think the other one for me is that this has been something that's been worked on for 5 years now. So it's not a surprise program that's just come out of nowhere. It's been worked on for some time, which we'll obviously touch on.
I think that was going to be one of my questions, just around, it's been somewhat under wraps and in stealth, and all of a sudden it pops up, roughly a $50 million deal. Some might fear, which would be a pretty good fear to have if this is your problem, but that it's a pivot. But that's not the case at all.
Not at all. No, in fact, it's an additional sort of acceleration of particular programs in the company. And so, and again, we'll let Ali touch on the history of the design development that's gone into it, which is actually really exciting. But for us, everything else is on track. All of the programs we have in our existing 3 franchises are all on track, both in funding and timing and access. So we're really excited just to add something new to the whole portfolio.
Maybe sorry to interrupt, Ali, but in terms of practically speaking,
sure.
I mean, I'm just thinking about nasal sprays and drug delivery and whatnot. I have one of the nasal sprays and I'm blowing my nose, sort of 5 minutes later, or it's coming out. How does it actually work?
It's a very good point. And the reasons that I want to talk about that sort of a pivot that Will mentioned. So it's essentially the exact same polymer that we use for our bone regeneration and tissue healing. So exact same polymer, same chemistry. The lower concentrations we use for this proposition. So from a technical IP, from a safety IP point of view, from manufacturing, there's no pivot. We essentially use exact same manufacturing, same line.
So it's still consistent with the whole platform.
Exactly. So that's a very important piece of these equations. And then how it works. So same polymer, lower concentrations. What we do, we essentially mixing it with the different compounds in these specific examples with GLP-1. This polymer essentially wrap around that GLP-1 to protect it. And what it does, once it's sprayed in the nostrils, because of the temperature responsive nature of the technology that we use for a variety of application, we form this sticky cushion on the nostrils, on the mucosal layers of a nose. And what it does essentially acts as a hook to keep the compounds where they need it to be, so they don't come down the nose or throat dripping. And with that, we can provide a very clinically reproducible vehicle for delivery of different compounds. So this has been under development for 5 years, more than 5 years. We originally started the development with a big pharma for mRNA, LNPs, vaccines. Because of obvious reasons, we essentially needed to pivot. We showed how effective the technology is for a variety of applications. We actually have 2 published publications in the literature about the utility of a technology for these applications. And now we've been able to show with mRNA, LNPs, analgesics, different growth factors, proteins, peptides, antibodies. And now we are fully developing and using the technology for GLP-1.
So I guess that sort of answers what was going to be my next question, just around, this market's massive. They're talking about 100 billion, fastest growing in the space ever. It's not like you guys have just hooked onto the latest trend. You talk about mRNA. I did ask if it was a pivot, and it sounded like you did pivot. But that was for you've obviously been at this for a while in terms of and it's got much broader applications just past GLP-1.
It's massive. And I think one of the things that we really like about the Superpower agreement and the partnership with them is the market is moving so quickly, and not only in GLP-1s, but in, peptides as an example, and even in Alzheimer's and neurodegenerative diseases, the research is moving so fast. And so one of the advantages of working with a group like Superpower is how quickly we can work with them to generate real world evidence. So we can get data to show clinically that the technology works in a much faster way than what you would traditionally see in this part of the world, in pharma or big pharma more broadly. And so what that provides is a way that we can not only keep up with the market, but leapfrog in some of the research that's being done at the moment.
Is it a fair analogy to use that you're basically getting paid to prove in terms of validation, with GLP-1 as a starter, that if this works, and we're definitely assuming it works, that it's 50 million bucks to put it on basically center stage.
It's very true, and also we're getting paid in two different forms as well, like a licensing as well mentioned, as well as the actual polymer sale as well, because we are going to sell the polymer to Superpower to use that in their formulation as well. So yeah, absolutely correct.
And just on Superpower, I think I've seen them in the IFR. Maybe it was last year, but who are they? What's their funding? Do they have the ability to fund this sort of deal? I'm assuming. They're growing pretty strongly as well, so they will.
They are, they're coming into a really hot market as well. And so you're right. The CEO and founder of the business, Max, is an Aussie who's living over in San Francisco at the moment and sort of flying the Aussie flag over there, which is great. So there is a nice sort of Aussie link there, which is great. But no, they're doing really cool stuff, which is a bit different to what's traditionally been seen in this space. So businesses like, say, Hims or Eucalyptus, that's been in the news more recently, and there's a whole bunch of other ones in the US as well, are great businesses, but what they are is more of an e-commerce style company.
More of a sort of consumer play, right?
Yeah, and they sell drugs online. So that's kind of their thing. Superpower, and the appeal for us is that they actually have this intelligent health system, this engine that basically works with their customers to collect real evidence for healthcare outcomes. And so it's data and AI driven, but also then has this kind of end-to-end full healthcare system that's integrated into their model. And so that's the big differentiator.
I know. I think I've seen, but I haven't seen your one, the Superpower cards that have your sort of profile picture and your underlying age and whatnot. So I'll have to make sure we get that one of Will later.
Yeah.
And in terms of not just going through a distribution partner, why is this strategically valuable? Having a Superpower.
Well, look, I think for us, again, it comes down to proving this out in the clinical setting. And so, as we just touched on, we've done almost as much data collection and research that you can do in a preclinical environment. So that's animals, benchtop, the rest of it as well. And so we're at that really exciting inflection point in that particular part of the company or the use of the technology to get into the clinical setting. And so there are a few different ways that we could go, a few different sort of avenues, but we found that this is a way, as I mentioned before, to really be ahead of the market and ahead of the curve in the collection of real world data, but importantly, proving it out so that we can then take that real world evidence and then expand that into different applications. And that could even be down the line, excitingly, into things like neurodegenerative disease for nasally delivered insulin, as an example, for Alzheimer's disease and other applications as well.
And we'll move on to other parts of the business because it's a platform play. But in terms of, over the next decade, it's obviously a significant amount of money coming in that, certainly from an investor perspective, we haven't budgeted for. What does that arm you with in terms of, being able to invest harder, in this space specifically, or is it, broader across a platform? How do you look at that?
Yeah, look, it's one of those things where I think it gives us real balance sheet strength that's probably ahead of schedule. I think that's the one thing that we're really excited about, that we always knew we had a path to, generating significant revenue and that commercial structure that we talked about before. But bringing this in now means that revenue allows for optionality in the future. So we can decide at whatever time and inflection point works for us to pivot into particular areas or make investments into certain strategic things within the business as well.
And we don't need to talk about the actual margin in terms of product, but there's 28 people in the company. It's pretty extraordinary in terms of being able to pull off a deal of this size. Where do you think that goes over time? Assuming that a number of the other segments are commercialized as well. Is that 300, 500,000? How do you look at that?
As in people? I think we're always going to maintain that lean, efficient model within the operation, and that can be across, whether it's production, manufacturing, customer success, as we call it, or whatever the division within the business. So, look, I don't think we're going to be, 300, but we're certainly not going to be 30 or 50 for very long.
No,
like it's kind of one of those things, and so we always want to maintain that financial sort of capability and structure within the business, and keeping that hygiene. And, we've got such a good financial team in the business that leads that process for us. And so that's a very big pillar of our strategic sort of direction and part of the business. So
if we change tack and look towards what I used to call the Bible, or it is the Bible in terms of the prospectus, and the scorecard within it, how do you sort of look at that in terms of, are you on track? Is everything gone to plan? What does this, the scorecard look like?
Yeah, look, we're very happy with where it's at. I think one of the things that we communicated through the prospectus was just how much news flow we had, which is a big differentiator for us.
Newsworthy news flows, actually.
Proper, actual news, not just stuff for the sake of it. And so that's been really, I think, helpful in keeping the share price where it's at and keeping investors interested with that sort of news coming through. Having said that, with all the things that we've delivered across clinical, technical, commercial, or financial within the business, almost all of it's been performing the way that we said it would and be on time and on budget. Nothing's perfect though. So there are a couple of different areas. There's one in particular that, within the orthopedic part of the business that we would have liked to have had a strategic global partnership signed by now. But I think that's sort of the benefit of the model that we have. We always have 3 or 4 different options for partnerships at any one time, and then we make a choice on what's the right one. We were almost at a point where we'd decided who that would be. Then that business we were dealing with had a late stage pivot. They changed some M&A strategy, and then it all kind of went to ground. It is what it is. And, when you're dealing with big businesses like we are, that stuff happens. So now we're very much into the DD on choice number 2 or 3. And so we're currently going through that, and it's not going to be too long until we have that partnership in place as well.
And partnerships, talking of which, Henry Schein, it's obviously one of the world's largest healthcare distributors, Fortune 500 company. It's in 33 countries. How the hell does a company like Tetratherix get in the room, and what do you actually say in there to form that sort of relationship?
So it's a 4 years relationship now, actually. So I think some part of it, without being humble, is go back to the technology and the propositions that we're providing. And then from the other side is also that due diligence that Will is talking about, to choose the right partners that we can work effectively with. It's been Will talked about the orthopedic side of the equations, but from the Henry Schein side of dental, it's been an amazing relationship. We are working with them on next generations to be able to get to the emerging markets, Australia included. So these relationships are very important, and that's the reasons that we have this great focus on a due diligence process of selecting these partners. And Henry Schein is one of the good examples in that aspect.
And just in terms of exactly what you're doing with Henry Schein, maybe if you just run us through that.
So Henry Schein will be the global distributor of our dental product. So same technology, providing the syringe format to clinicians.
What's the name of the dental product?
T-Genix. All the T's and X's.
Yep.
And we use the technology, so clinicians will use the technology as a bone graft extender. So mix it with the bone graft particles to make this putty, so they can roll it, shape it to the shape of the bone defect that they want to place the product in. It simplifies some of the dental surgeries and essentially help the patients to recover faster. So we showed that potentially patients can have a full dental implant placement within 2 to 3 months, as opposed to 6 to 9 months of waiting. So we are working with Henry Schein not only on that product, but also on the future generations in a solid format and so on and so forth, to reach other markets such as Australia and even Europe. So very good interactive relationship that we have with Henry Schein for these ongoing developments.
I think that's also a indication of how we structure these over a long period of time as well. So we don't try and just have a 2 to 3 year transactional kind of buy and sell relationship. This is We've done 4 years of DD. We then have 15-year co-development style agreement in place where we look at what markets do we go after, how do we do it, and how do we do it properly so that we're not just rushing things to market.
And if we look at on the regulatory side, we talk about FDA, 510K and whatnot. It's spat out crude language, but 95% success rate. How important is that? And maybe explain it for the less medically informed personnel like myself, what it actually means.
Yeah, so look, obviously FDA approval or clearance in a 510K setting is really important because it does allow you to then sell and market your product in the biggest medical technology market in the world. But having said that, in our game, to get through that regulatory pathway or the clearance is work, and it is something that does take cost and infrastructure to get it across the line. But what it allows you to do then is enter a market that's a competitive market, and you still need to then get physicians to understand how to use the product, why it's very important that they use it for their patients, and what are the clinical outcomes that they can expect. There's unit economics considerations around reimbursement, how does the product get paid for. So FDA clearance through a 510K pathway or otherwise is really, really important because it is what we call the hunting license to get you into the hunt. But importantly, the analogy that we use is, if you sort of talk a footy analogy,
I was waiting for it.
It allows you to get on the team, but you still need to go and play a season to get to the grand final. And so for us, the FDA approval is an important step in the process, but we will get there and it'll happen on time and on budget that we've previously communicated. But then the hard work starts, which is working with the partner on getting the product in the hands of physicians.
And if we last week we spoke to the ASX in terms of the Tetratherix announcement, Series A pilot study. Maybe just give us a bit of a background as to why that was significant and why it was so pleasing.
Yeah, look, I'll let Ali go through the technical side, which is really exciting as we transition into a more of a pivotal style US and Australian study. But around the raise and the commercial aspect of that, it's a really important inflection point for them as a business, not only in the funding to fund that runway going forward, but what it has done is bring in key opinion leading physicians from particularly the US, but also here in Australia, who have seen the value of the technology and the company, who have actually come in and invested their own capital to then be involved in the business and be a part of the technology. And so what we will likely see is that some or all of those physicians will then be involved in either the data collection for the pivotal trial in the US and eventually be the end users and those sort of KOLs that can use peer-to-peer education to really communicate the value of the tech once it launches. So that's the sort of commercial side, which is really exciting, but I think technically it's a good inflection point as well.
So like from a technical point of view, we have a few more patients, 1 or 2 to complete the pilot trial. That was in 2 sites in Australia. And we have few patients reaching the 6 months follow-up time point with no adverse events. There has been very good safety profile for a technology from a usability and a performance also the same. So all the patients reached their primary endpoint, and from a utility point of view, again, all these results are building that equations, that's a story for this successful Series A fundings that Tetratherix joint venture could complete. And also throughout this process with the data that we got as a part of this pilot trial, we also could confirm the details of the pivotal trial with FDA. And that is the reasons that this capital raise will give enough liquidity for the company to start that pivotal trial that will be both in Australia and US, for aiming for that FDA 510K clearance of the Tetratherix products thereafter as well.
And why not own it outright? Why JV?
It's an interesting question. So there's 2 different philosophies that we have when we're trying to design a product to go after something in the market, because obviously that platform allows us to do so. There's the first philosophy, which is disruption, which is where we're going into a market that's ripe for disruption in a way of us using a technology that hasn't been used before in a particular way. So typically we've got a little bit more time and patience to do that and to put the measures in place. But then the other flip side or the other philosophy is displacement. And so the displacement philosophy for us is there's already some technologies that are in the market, but we can design a product that can do it better, that can displace it really quickly. And so the way that we try and go about that design, development, and commercialization is with rapid development. And we want to go after that opportunity as fast as we can. So if we have a JV structure where the other side of that JV is either clinical and or commercial leaders who know what they're doing and have dedicated resource to execute on the plan, then that's where we do that. And so BioOptics is a good example in our ophthalmic opportunity, but importantly in Tutelix as well. There's 2 products or maybe 3, depending on what market you're in, where we know we can displace that technology really quickly and really effectively. And so by doing so, we've set up this JV so that the other side, in this case, Coda Health, which are local experts in the field, we've gone from an ideation of a product to an approval of a US study within 2 years. And that in this market is incredibly quick and something that we want to keep doing in these other displacement opportunities as well.
I think it probably goes back to the whole platform play, but in terms of funding something like Tutelix, it basically keeps it off relatively off your balance sheet, right?
Yep.
In terms of cash drain. So to be able to again be diversified and de-risked, and probably most importantly have the physician to as people always saying the listed game, show me the incentive and I'll show you the result.
Exactly.
Putting their own money in is a pretty powerful indicator in terms of the potential there.
That's right. Exactly. And also having a separate structure allows for, as you said, a separate balance sheet. It also has a separate sort of corporate structure that can, if it does make sense, be acquired by a strategic.
Yep.
And in that case, we almost have our cake and eat it too, where we get the liquidity from the capital
and
gain,
the product,
and then we end up selling selling the product to the acquirer, who is obviously going to be a scaled market leader in the space. And so that's kind of another advantage that we've got by putting that structure in place.
Makes perfect sense. If we move on, in terms of the lessons and the long game with Tetratherix, it's been 15, 16 years. Did you ever any, when was, and I'm sure you would have, and if you tell me no, then I'll say you're a liar. Did you ever worry that this wouldn't work?
Of course.
Yeah. When was the most recent, and don't say in the last 9 months because that'll be the wrong answer.
No.
But when was the last time that you worried that this might not work, whether it was funding wise or it's not that easy in Australia in terms of funding these sort of businesses. When was that? And what
funding? 2022 was a challenging year to raise capital. From a technical point of view, honestly, I can say almost like after the first animal study, 2012, I knew that there's something's happening here and it's a good news.
Yep.
So it wasn't much of a technical risk. It was mostly like raising capital all the way seed VCs and all the way through. I would say 2022 was a challenging year, but after that, it's been an interesting journey.
Head down and execution.
Yeah.
And I think that challenge also forged the culture in the leadership team in the business as well. So I agree. I think 22 was a pretty challenging year for everyone involved, and I think what it did was again forge the grit and determination in the business, but it also I think shaped how now we think about using money and capital allocation and managing the finances and things like we just said around the Tutelix structure. Part of that is actually by deliberate design on how we use capital and how we look at shareholder capital in particular. And so we have a very hygienic way of allocating capital in the business that is all shareholder focused, because that's 40-50% of it is us. So
if it comes too easy, sometimes it changes the way you run a business, right? In terms of if you had to raise 100 million, you go and spray a whole bunch of bullets and be not as disciplined as you are.
It's one gas.
Yeah, exactly.
You've got 28 people now executing across 4-5 products and now 4 franchises. How do you sort of manage focus versus opportunity out there and not do too much?
Yeah, it's hard because there is so much ahead of you. And I think this sort of precision medicine or drug delivery opportunity is a good example of that, where we probably could have accelerated things and brought it to market and announced it and tried to put a partnership in place a couple of years ago. But not doing that is an example of us thinking, well, actually, if we did pursue that, A, we're not ready. B, the science needs a bit more work. And there are these other parts of the business that are more important for us to execute, not only from a, just corporate perspective, but also to demonstrate the trust that, the market and our shareholders need to have in us to execute. And so we do make decisions like that about how to prioritize things. We've now got a lot more people in the business as well, so it allows us to make more.
A lot more people being 28.
Well, yeah.
It doesn't sound that much.
Mate, it's doubled in 12 months. So,
Okay.
and so I think that certainly allows us to make some of these more strategic decisions. But I think as we grow, particularly as we start to launch in new markets, I think that's going to have to. It'll test the way that we think about that type of stuff. And so
also we need to mention is the lean structures that we have has been deliberate. So we do what we are good at. We do work with lots of universities and research institutes. That's make the structure for running these R&D projects very lean and efficient. And we basically developed IP and we manufacture. And that's by itself, it makes the business model very lean and efficient. So sometimes we joke about it, but like we're thinking about like 100, 120, 130 people would be the max of the number of people in the company. And that is a very scalable approach with the way that we do business without having focus on the marketing and in sale and marketing of the technologies and these novel licensing commercialization models that we have in place.
What do you think has been the hardest thing or the biggest learning lesson? Maybe one for you, Will, given that you're the face to the market in terms of investors, from being listed. What's been the biggest sort of eye opener or lesson?
How constant the attention needs to be. I think that's one of the things that, and again, we're in a great position where we've got a lot of good news, but I think the one thing that I've been surprised with is how often you need to get fresh meat out to the market, as we call it. So, and again, we do that because it's part of our nature, but you can see that there is a direct correlation between the market understanding what you're doing. And it can make sense, right? Like the more communication, the better. But you can just see, and I probably didn't appreciate the amount of generalist investors out there that have so many things that they need to focus on, and rightly so. They can't remember everything, in particular the 6 names we have that start with T and end with X, so that type of stuff. Cause. Yeah, exactly. So lesson learned there. But yeah, I think that's probably the one thing that comes through for me is just the constant communication that's required.
And you've talked about going too fast, too hard, can be the death of you. You link back in with that in terms of investors wanting more. How do you sort of balance, having a controlled launch strategy across a number of these different products without, just wanting to feed it into the market to, again, we don't focus on the share price, but investors do, and they want a sugar hit and they want, traction and catalysts. And how do you bite that back?
Well, I think one of the good things about the platform nature is that we sort of avoid some of that risk by having multiple things going on at once. But we often try to explain wherever we can to investors around launching things in this market is not done well if it's done quickly. And so the example I often use is in my time at Medtronic many years ago, we had a product that came out in 3 markets, Australia, Japan, and the US, came out of the blocks hard. It was an amazing product in bone regeneration. And it got used off-label by some physicians in Japan. And within 6 months, it was $1 billion product. The Japanese wanted to use it in an area that wasn't indicated for. There were some patient outcomes that were then presented at a podium, and then the next day it went to 0. And so that control on the message and the usage and the way that products are used in the market in a particular way has to be done properly for the longevity of the success of the product and the technology. So that's something that we make sure we work with our partners on. But you just don't want to go too hard, too fast with this stuff. And so if that means we need to communicate that more to the market and to shareholders and investors, then so be it. And thankfully the partners and the big multinationals that we work with, they get that already, right? So they're in that market position for a reason. And so it's a nice fit there. But yeah, it's just more about communicating why you can't go too hard, too fast.
Maybe a few more, but one for you, Ali, in terms of what you know now. What do you wish someone had have told you, the younger Ali, about building a company like Tetratherix?
It's fun, without a doubt. But I know, seriously, one of my first things as a PhD, I was having this medical Lego that you talk about. So my initial idea was very naively that we can sort of like attune this for different applications. So we can sort of like increase some part of this polymer and make more of this medical Lego. That's what we do for Tetratherix. But I was thinking that I can be way more liberal than this because I wasn't aware of the regulatory sort of like constraints around this. So that was one of the things that I wish I knew. It would have saved me so much time. But outside that, yeah, it was a very interesting journey. I learned a lot. So I'm still learning. So yeah.
And maybe since listing and one without notice, how's the relationship between you two been since listing in terms of changing? Yeah, obviously in a listed landscape, actual business itself doesn't change that much. But how have you found working together in a listed company now? Has it changed much since being private? How do you look at that?
I think it's never been better, to be honest. I think it's
a bit of a bromance.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, we talk about each other as brothers in that sort of sense around, we spend so much time together and often finish each other's sentences, which is always a bit awkward.
Getting romantic.
Well, yeah, exactly. So no, it's been great, and I think it's one of those things that has evolved over time as well. And I think the one thing we were often joking about in the last couple of weeks is you get so busy taken into your different sort of respective parts of the business and your duties that we need to remind ourselves to come back together and spend time just thinking about the business and spending time on planes and, 18 hours from Dallas where you can sit down and actually think,
it's been very helpful actually.
The strategy.
And there's no Wi-Fi, no phones to distract you.
No, exactly. Yeah. And so that's, I think, a really important part of it, right? So we're still a young business that's growing and we're in this great position with great success because the two of us have worked together on creating what the strategy should be and we don't want to lose that. So if anything, the lesson through the listing process is make sure you dedicate time that the two of us and the other leadership team as well, like everyone in the business and the ELT and even all the layers below are all working their asses off and do such a good job. And we put out an opinion piece in the last sort of couple of weeks that goes through how we think about the team and how they allocate themselves into projects, almost like a Navy SEAL team. Which sounds a bit American for the American listeners out there, they'll get it. But it is something that we're really proud of is just how everyone dedicates themselves in that lean model to the business and coming back to Ali and I and how we work together, we need to make sure that that's maintained. And so I think going through that process with deliberate time together forges more of a strategic alignment, and it's never been better.
Absolutely.
It's good to see because it doesn't always work that way.
No,
different personalities. Last question. Yeah, we look back in 3 years' time. I would say but when you've nailed it and when you make it, what does that look like?
I would say we'll get closer, if not hitting that milestone of treating 10 million patients. That patient impact, I think, will be still very live.
Yep. I think that'd be it. I mean,
a driver. Yeah.
We're in this for the mission of, helping patients. And so that's where our North Star remains and always will be. And so I think that in 3 years' time, if we can look back and say we've not so much maximized, but optimized, I think there's such a long road to go of getting to as many patients as you can. But if in 3 years we're happy with the momentum and the acceleration of patient impact, then we're all happy.
Absolutely.
And in terms of, just to follow on, the top three sort of valuation drivers, sorry to bring it back to share price, but valuation drivers in terms of, products, franchises, what does that look like in 3 years? And obviously they're going to be at different scales in terms of maturing. Yeah. Superpower will be, ramped up by then and the rest of it. But how do you sort of look at that?
So without giving forward-looking statements, the 6 now products that we have across the 4 franchises, there'll probably only be one at that point that won't be in market yet. All the rest will be generating revenue and high gross margin revenue at that. We'll also have expanded into multiple geographies, not just the US, but other markets outside of that. So from a valuation perspective, what that means is that we've got a faster path to a profit generating business, but also importantly revenue across the platform, which I think for me, one of the things that we're going to try to focus on in the next couple of years is making sure we prove to the market the model does work. And as soon as I think the model is proven in
rest of the portfolio
multiple
gets valued.
sources of revenue, multiple approvals, and pipeline products coming behind it, that's when things are going to start to rip.
It's a fascinating story. It always gets better every time I hear it. Well done again for
Cheers. Thank
building
you.
it and
Thanks, mate.
executing it. Looking forward to watching on the ride. Thanks very much, guys.
Thanks for having us.